Hello and welcome to Default Assault, where we take on everything by default. I'm your host, Demosthenes, and with me as always is Mr. Kyle Nash. How's it going, Kyle?
Are you ready for Oscar season, Levy?
It's that time of year again, and the Oscar nominations just came out this week. We're not going to really delve too much into this year's nominations just yet. We want to ask the overall question of whether the Oscars, as of today, are still relevant. And we're going to take a look at the last few decades and what the trends are, and if the Best Picture winner really has any more meaning, for better or for worse. These are the Best Picture nominees of this year: Call Me by Your Name, Darkest Hour, Dunkirk, Get Out, Lady Bird, Phantom Thread, The Post, The Shape of Water, and 3 Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri. Now, Kyle, out of these 9 movies, how many have you seen?
Where's my Admiral Akbar sound clip? It's a trap! I have not sampled any of these films at this point in time.
And that's, you're not alone in this, right? Because out of these 9 films, right, only 2 of them are in the top 25 grossing list of the whole year. And that's Dunkirk, as of the moment, Dunkirk, which was the number 14 most successful film of the year, and Get Out, which was number 16. Those are the 2 films the general population who is going to watch the Oscars, those are the films they're more likely rooting for because they've seen them. Now, of course, Shape of Water is one of the favorites, as is 3 Billboards. They fall down on the list, number 78 and number 75. Now, before we get into this, I'm going to say right now that I do not equate box office gains with quality. Because if that was the case, then Transformers would be the next Citizen Kane, or even better, they're bigger films than Citizen Kane, all bow down to Transformers. Those words, except for the irony, are never going to escape my lips. I decided to take a look at all the Best Picture winners, going back to the 1960s, and try to see if there is a correlation between the Best Picture and success. And what I found is actually some facts are somewhat staggering. All right. Now, get ready for some math and some stats, people. Right. Let's take a look at the 1960s. Right. Out of the 10 films that won Best Picture in the 1960s, 70% were in the top 5 of their respective years. 90% were in the top 10. And all 100% were in the top 25 of the year. Let's take a look at the 1970s. Again, 70% in the top 5, 100% were in the top 10, and all 100% were in the top 25. 1980s, there's a little bit of a drop. 40% in the top 5, 60% in the top 10, all 100% in the top 25. In the 1990s, we had 40% in the top 5, 60% in the top 10, all 100% in the top 25. In the 2000s, there's a bit of a drop. 20% in the top 5, 30% in the top 10, and 70% in the top 25. Since 2010, 0% of the winners have been in the top 5, 0% have been in the top 10, and as of last year, only 29% have been in the top 25. And as I said before, of the 9 nominated this year, only 2 are in the top 25.
So 0 in the top 5, 0 in the top 10, 29 in the top 25.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's been a tremendous drop and a tremendous change in how we perceive Best Picture, or what wins Best Picture. It's a significant enough drop to make you question why this is happening. Could it be that one of the reasons is that the theater prices in general, they're going up? Taking a family to a theater right now, between the ticket prices and how much it costs to get concessions and so forth, can end up being almost $100 evening, right? But then you plus that with the fact that the the time span between when a movie comes out in theaters and when a movie is available on home video or on Netflix and so forth has become minuscule. That perhaps people are waiting to see the smaller movies, to see the movies that are more likely to win Best Picture, the smaller, more contemplative pieces. Perhaps these are movies that people are waiting to see at home rather than to pay the big bucks when they could be going to see something that is designed for a theater with a great sound, with a great special effects. Something perhaps like Transformers that, you couldn't replicate that experience at home.
You mentioned the dollar amount being a factor. I think the technology causes not only both the dollar amount anomaly, but moreover increases the accessibility to movies, right? In the past, I have no idea how members of the Academy got in front of movies. Maybe they sent them film reels. I don't know. Whereas VCR tapes, by comparison, they're far more portable. You can ship them. Hey, so-and-so Academy members, watch my shiznit. And here's a bottle of champagne to go with it. Damn it, I already drank my wine. I can't use my prop. Anyways, so then you go from there to DVDs as the next physical medium, wherein, hey, Academy guy, I only need to pay the price of a damn stamp to get you this shiznit. And even lower budget independent entities are going, what the hell? Here you go. Somehow or another, these Academy members got to find time to watch this, but the exposure is more in their favor. Then on top of all that, you get into the late 90s and the 2000s, where internet media makes it right at their fingertips. And if they could take a break between porn viewings, they can check out an Oscar, what will become an Oscar nominee that you never heard of previously. What the hell is Three Billboards? I had not even heard of that movie until this week.
We see that you might be hitting upon the one positive aspect of some of these movies being nominated, and the fact that, hey, it goes back to one other difference going back from the difference between the 1960s and today is the amount of movies that are released per year has skyrocketed. There is no comparison. When a movie like My Fair Lady or The Godfather or so forth, when they came out, they were events. Nowadays, a movie might be an event for a week or two, especially when you consider the theater experience versus that home experience. I mentioned in my review of Coco earlier this year, or my attempted review of Coco, I was looking forward to this movie. I tried to go see it twice at the theaters, and both times I was defeated. And no, it wasn't that pointless 25-minute long Olaf short at the beginning. It was the patrons of the theater. I had this one lady in front of me, literally, because her kids were bored. She pulls out her iPad and starts playing Frozen in the middle of the opening of Coco. So they actually paid money. There were like 6 kids in there. $10 a ticket. She paid like $70 so she can go into this theater and watch another movie on an iPad with the sound on. And may I mention the sing-along version? If you think that you can't get away from Let It Go when it's playing on the goddamn radio every 5 minutes, and now you're at a movie theater watching another movie and there are kids singing it in front of you, the overall theater experience has changed.
It used to be a big event. Now it's just, oh my God, I need to get the hell out of the house and somewhere where I might be able to drag the kids,
It's become a babysitter in one way.
God, you might be right, but I'm praying you aren't. And USA. It's not even the kids that I blame. It's the parents of the kids in this instance. Like, you're telling me this chick thought it was a good idea to whip out the sing-along version on a goddamn iPad. Boy, that's an expensive download if you spent $100 or whatever it is to take all your kids to the theater. No, they sit through it. And if they aren't enjoying the movie, they're taking a lesson in how the hell you behave in public.
I guess there is something to be said about overall etiquette, and that could be a bigger topic in and of itself about a lack of etiquette in general. I mean, take a look at internet culture, and the word etiquette does not apply in most cases. But there is something to be said about these smaller movies versus the big pyrotechnic films. And these are the kind of films that are more likely to draw somebody to have the theater experience. Dunkirk, which was nominated this year for Best Picture, I saw that in IMAX. And that was an incredible experience. This movie was designed to be seen on a big screen. I recently spoke to some people who have seen Dunkirk, but they have only seen it on their home television sets. And I wasn't too surprised when they said they didn't like it very much. Some movies, arguably, are designed for that big theater experience. And yet, the movies that seem to gravitate towards the Academy, they're more intimate films. They're the films that you can watch and have a powerful experience at home. I mean, which would you rather go see in theaters, Kyle? What you know of Three Billboards or Black Panther? Like, which one is, do you see the title and you're like, I need to see that on the big screen with the big sound system?
Sure, you definitely got to see Black Panther in there. Like, Three Billboards is this intimate movie, whereas Black Panther, you're going to be seeing for the first time an entire fictional African nation under the rule of T'Challa. That's something that commands. Listen, if Disney's Soarin' was you putting up a kite and sitting in an easy chair, that would be a garbage ass ride. As it is, Soarin' is overrated anyway at Disney. That's right, I said it. But it's a far less experience when you do even that. I'm just saying.
Yeah, Soarin' wouldn't exactly be the same watching it at home, sitting in a lazy boy trying to move along. It's just not going to happen, and if you want to get the nice smell of oranges, have your wife throw oranges at your face. It's just not going to happen.
Nice.
This crossover between successful Best Picture winners and the smaller films winning in 2010 kind of correlates to the rise of the comic book film. Especially with the Marvel Cinematic Universe really taking off between 2008 and now. You look back at the last 10 years of the most successful movies, and they tend to be these comic book movies. They tend to be these big franchise movies, Pirates of the Caribbean, Transformers, etc. These are movies that people want to see on the big screen. These are, dare I say it, now the event films. I really would wonder if Silence of the Lambs, which came out in 91, was the fourth most successful movie of the year. If it was released now, today, brand new, if it would still be number 4 and possibly not number 20 like Dunkirk or Get Out.
That may very well be, but that's the conversation we have so often when we're on Default Assault here, like we are talking required viewing. At the end of the day, Avengers, for example, may make that run to where if we're, God willing, doing this show, for what, 14 more years, we're doing the show, God willing, where we would do a required reading on Avengers and not be seen as doing it ironically, but maybe that'll happen, but maybe, or I shouldn't say maybe, but the other extreme is, Jackass the movie. No.
Is Jackass the movie required viewing? Followed by our episode on Godfather Part 3.
Anyways, now you mentioned are the Academy Awards still relevant? While it may not be relevant in that it's all about spectacle and awarding the common man's audience, so long as it's a big event that is played for hours on end, where they're struggling, if not battling, every actor with an acceptance speech to keep this bitch going until it ends before midnight. That, as long as that is something that still happens, it's very relevant in this way, Demos. it gives these independent films that don't have a shot but are really good a chance to shine. The Academy Awards have become a way for the smaller movies to, check this pun, get out into the mainstream and be accepted and possibly be even seen as a masterpieces they may in fact be. Now, while I personally haven't ever seen Moonlight, the fact that it was nominated and then, incorrectly seen as not winning and then actually winning, and then hearing more about its story and more about the actors in it, that's a really great thing that the Academy Awards will accomplish. But let's not bullshit here, Demos. When they saw that movie and saw the lead actor in it, they were like, oh shit, that's Cottonmouth from Luke Cage, okay? Don't tell me that shit didn't happen.
Well, the cynical part of me might also take a look at some of these past winners, especially in the last few years, and think that there might be relevance to this argument, saying that there is a political motivation behind these wins. Now, that's not a road I really want to get down on today's episode, but you bring up a great point about relevance. And there are a few different ways you can look at this. I mean, let's take this into account, right? The Academy Awards over the last few years have been diving down in ratings. And I do not believe that it is very much about the fact that these shows are long. They have always been long. I think that a part of it might have to do with the fact that movies that the general public is aware of are not getting nominated. Now, they tried to fix this problem just a little while ago when they decided to expand the Best Picture nominees from 5 to up to 10. And rarely do they actually get up to 10. This year it's 9. They could have had one more in there. When you look at the 70s, you look at 1970, you see Patton, followed by The French Connection, The Godfather, The Sting, Godfather Part 2, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, Rocky, Annie Hall. I can keep going on. These are films that came out 40 years ago that we're still talking about today. Is it because of the Academy Award win? No, there could be an argument to be said. But how many people in the next 40 years are going to be talking about Crash? Are going to be talking about The Artist? Or 12 Years a Slave? Or Spotlight? Do these films truly, even though they're smaller films and weren't as successful at the box office, are these films that are going to last, that are still going to be relevant in 20 years? Now, that's not a question that we can ask, but it's something that we can speculate on.
I think part of it as well, Demos, is because there was so much less art available, lacking a better word, so much less art available via the cinema at the time. At the time, you needed a studio, which means you needed a pitch, which means you needed to there were so many barriers to entry that complete trash could not make it through the door. Aziz Ansari and Seth Rogen and James Franco would have been kicked down the friggin' stairs entirely early in the process, and they would have never been a thing. However, in the world with on-demand content, 24-hour news cycles, and I want it at my fingertips via my phone. I don't give a shit if I could actually make a phone call on it or not. That is a completely different demand. And because there is so much more art, there's so much more niche, there's so much more depth, the mass appeal is virtually impossible because it's that much more difficult to reach people who are members of different niches. I mean, hell, you even have niches within niches, when you're talking Team Cap and Team Stark in the comic book concept. And that's one of the more mainstream ones, obviously. Rocky was amazing. You take that as an example because boxing was relevant as a sport. It brought in sports fans. It brought in the male demographic for boxing. It was an excellent love story between Rocky and Adrian. It brought in other elements other than your macho types.
It was accessible even to people who weren't fans of boxing.
And moreover, the competition for stories like that didn't exist the same way like it did back then. Period.
That is the answer. In my opinion, you hit the nail on the head. There is that mass of content out there that is unlike anything that we saw back then. The one big positive thing about the Oscars not nominating mainstream films is that they might be highlighting these. And there aren't, I mean, let's be honest, not many of these are big, small, independent films. I mean, when you have films directed by Guillermo del Toro, The Post, Steven Spielberg, these aren't small, independent films. If they really wanted to go, I mean, I think the closest on this list would probably be Lady Bird as something a little bit out there. But these aren't going to bring the ratings. This year, we're probably going to see a bit of a higher rating on the program because I would argue because of Get Out's nomination.
You know what you're using right there? That's the Tiger Woods defense.
That
the demographic that weren't normally accessible to golf courses and such. Now with Get Out, you're bringing in a demographic that isn't normally accessible to a particular typical Oscar nominee.
And you can even go farther and say, well, Logan also nominated for Best Adapted Screenplay.
I would still argue the same thing.
Yeah.
It's the Tiger Woods defense, where obviously the hint there is referencing, the black moviegoers. Logan, you're more speaking to the nerd that would be like, I'm not really worried about what happens at the Oscars. I just want to see if they got it right. Like comic book episode number 1462, where this happens. There
goes half our audience. But
exactly. Which, hey, listen, I could use the N-word nerd because I am one. All right, there you go.
This is how I would fix the Oscars if you were to ask. I don't necessarily agree with this top, up to 10 nominations. If you're going to have that many, I would go the route and of the Golden Globes. And that's not to say that the Golden Globes are better, are any better. But the one thing I do like that they do is that they separate their nominations based on genre. You have comedy or musical versus drama. And I think that if they separated that as far as the best picture and as far as the acting, I think that there would be a little bit more of an appeal, especially possibly to galvanize or at least pay tribute to all these great comic actors that are constantly brushed off in favor of the dramatic.
That's a good solution in itself. I would even also submit that you do a best overall. So you have your best, you do all this with your best comedy, best blah, 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 blah. And then there be a final reward of still of best picture, but that one can be genre non-specific. That could be, that can be something where you could still shine to show overall and appeal to a mainstream audience. It's kind of like going to a bodybuilding event with weight classes. If you're a 200-pound guy going up against a 300-pound guy, you're going to have more of the opportunity to look more physically impressive. But if you're born to only be short, there's not a whole lot you can do about that. Ergo, when you get pumped and you start to bulk up, then you could still win your class. But at the end of the day, that's the opportunity to get your mainstream representation in there that you're referring to that's hurting the air quotes relevance in terms of the default moviegoer back to the Oscars. It's a good compromise, I think, that you're suggesting.
I'm going to play devil's advocate here, but wouldn't you say that if you did have that best overall, that would still, the favor would still go to the dramatic in the same way that's going on now?
I don't know. I really don't know the answer to that. Obviously, it's possible. In anything surrounding the arts, listen, the stigma against comedies, it has nothing to do with the genre, in my opinion. Okay, it has to do with the biases of the people who are on the committee. All right, it's the same thing you see in college football. You have schools' athletic directors, acting and former, as members of the college football playoff committee that select which teams go. Okay. It's no different than you got a room full of stuffed shirts that are associated with a particular genre and a particular age group, and they're all going to vote for the same shiznit over and over again. It's the same reason The Dark Knight wasn't nominated in the eyes of many when it should have been. It's the same reason why you don't see comedies, generally speaking, is because these guys think that the Academy is too refined.
Well, it's the fact that drama is equivocated with what is important. This is an important film. These films have a message to say. That's why people are more likely gonna see a film like Silence of the Lambs or Unforgiven and say, this is an important film. This has a message, versus the rarity of, let's say, The Return of the King or Chicago.
And yet, you, as somebody who is an aspiring critic and will likely be one officially within the next 12 months, had in your 2017 lessons learned that I want less politics in movies.
I have no problems with films being political. The Post, which was nominated this year, political. Get Out has that an anti-racism message, etc. But I would say I have a problem with what people would equate to as virtue signaling, when something is forced and you feel like you're being lectured to, something that is patronizing, and that is happening more and more.
Boom! Throwing the right word and perfect verb for this situation at them. I love it, Demosthenes.
To wrap up, are the Oscars still relevant? I would say that although it's great the fact that they are, calling out some of these smaller films, if you're gonna make the comparison between box office performance and Best Picture winner, and then say that the Oscars are losing relevance because they're not getting the ratings that they're getting, if people aren't watching the Oscars to see or get exposed to these films, then that's a problem.
That's a good point. That doesn't mean they're not relevant. Based on your argument, you're saying they're less relevant, which is fine. There's a couple things here that I think you're making correlation that isn't necessarily causality. Not to say you're wrong, but there's a couple other things to be considered. One, hell, bruh, we're doing an episode on this bitch right now. That and there's still impact that it has on the fabric of the film community. Like I mentioned earlier, it's making less relevant films more relevant. It does that much more. An actor's resume is thusly bolstered by the Academy win, and least the one that has the least mass appeal is what I'll say is a lot of the acting artist community have now used it as a place to make a political statement as well, which thereby, whether you like it or not, makes them relevant, because damn sure they'll have a headline the next day if somebody says something.
That's the funny thing. If that to me is the biggest turnoff of these award shows, that's one of the reasons I don't tune in as much. At the end of the day, I'm not laying all of this at the Academy Awards feet, right? Because I think that all the aspects that we have talked about all attribute to this overall issue, and that's the amount of films that are released, the excess of content, the theater prices going up, the theater experience versus a home experience, and the audience taste in general. All of these contribute to what we're seeing right now. And although, as a final word, I would say that the Oscars still, have a tier of relevancy, they are not as relevant as they may have once been.
That could be true. I think we've come through with a great cocktail napkin of what the problem is. The real air quotes problem with finding these problems, Demos, is I don't have a good solution for you.
I don't think there is a solution. I think that time is a solution. And while we're waiting on times to change, make sure to tune in to Default Assault every Thursday and visit hilaritybydefault.com for new movie reviews every week and other fun stuff. Find me on Twitter at DefaultHilarity, on Facebook, Hilarity by Default. And Kyle, where can we find you?
Of course, you can find me on Twitter as the SOTG, and of course on Facebook as the Student of the Game. I will be releasing my stupid early Super Bowl preview this week. Actually, it would have released Thursday morning, or maybe later in the week, depending on how things go. But look for that upcoming on NGSesports.com. Network.com.
Are you going to answer the question, is the Super Bowl still relevant?
Bitch, please.